Please join me in welcoming to the stage co-chair of Warren for President and Boston's Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley.
Wow. Well, good morning, family. Or should I say, since Pastor Culpepper warmed you up, good morning, church. It is so good to be in the Massachusetts 7th. It is so good to be in Boston. It is so good to be home. You know, I cannot think of any place I would rather be as we close out 2019 than here with you today in community. In a matter of hours, we will close the chapter on 2019 and begin a new year and a new decade. This is a time for reflection, for introspection, for renewal, for reset. Every morning, my husband Conan and I set our intention for the day and reset by reading an affirmation from a book called The President's Devotionals by Joshua Dubois. The pages of this book over time have become dog-eared and well-worn because we have revisited them many times. And the affirmation that we have revisited the most is entitled, A Gentle Battle. And ostensibly, I'll paraphrase it. What it says is that every morning we awaken to a gentle battle. And we must decide as soldiers in what direction we'll march. How shall our minds be focused? Will we march in the direction of worry, weariness, and indifference? Or in the direction of joy, of peace, of equality, and justice? Of all the negotiations and decisions in our day, this gentle battle is the most important. Your presence here today is a testament to that gentle battle. In spite of the adversity and the frequent heartbreak of 2019, again and again, you have chosen hope. Every morning, you have awakened to that gentle battle, and you have won it by choosing to march in the direction of equity and justice. You have chosen to turn towards the future, hopeful. You have linked arms, and you have worked your hearts out because you know that you cannot allow cynicism and apathy to make a home in your heart. We don't have the luxury of cynicism. When our immigrant neighbors live in fear of a knock at their door. When moms and dads are working the second and third shift, desperate to cover rent and a medical bill for their children. We don't have the luxury of cynicism when faith leaders are studying their congregations through the aftermath of hate crimes. When families are reeling because they were robbed of their loved ones' lives by unregulated weapons of war. In the face of this adversity, you have remained steady. You have organized. You have mobilized. You have shown up for your neighbors. You've shown up for strangers. You have rejected tired tropes meant to divide us and to make us feel small. You have learned that together we are powerful. You have chosen to work towards the future, the world we want our children to grow up in. In our family, New Year's Eve is spent in reflection, in worship, and in aspiration. We see it as an opportunity to take stock of the blessings and challenges of the year behind us and to look ahead, eyes fixed on what is possible. We are gathered here today to give each other permission to dream of what is possible. I am talking about an America that is within our reach. I'm talking about an America that I want my daughter to grow up in. I'm talking about an America where my Senator, Elizabeth Ann Warren, is the President of the United States of America. That's right. That's right, sounds good. Sounds good, and it's going to feel even better. It is always said that it is impossible until it is done. Well, guess what? Elizabeth Warren has a plan for that. And here's the good news. It isn't sitting on a shelf. It is sitting in these very pews. This is about the people, all of the people, choosing to roll up our sleeves and to fight for the future we want for our children. I recently met a 9-year-old scholar at a school right here in Boston, and I asked her, "What are your aspirations?" She stared back hard. And I said, "Aspirations are something you hope for." And clear as day, she said, "Miss Ayanna, I know what aspirations are." But I don't have aspirations, I have plans. True story. Clearly, she takes after our next president. With that, family, I am proud to introduce you to the woman who makes me believe in the possibility of 2020, who wakes every day to that gentle battle, joins hands with community, and walks boldly in the direction of equity and justice. Our Senator and our next President, Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you. In a few hours, the dawn of a new year will break over America, offering us a moment for pause and reflection. Now, it is normally a moment for optimism, but let's face it, this year in America has been anything but normal. In the past 12 months, the president has become bolder with his lies and more brazen with his law-breaking. He has tried to squeeze a foreign government to advance his own political fortunes. Meanwhile, the Republicans in Congress have turned into fawning, spineless defenders of his crimes. It has brought no one any joy, but the House Democrats upheld their sworn duty to the Constitution and impeached the President of the United States of America. And soon, I will return to the Senate and do my sworn duty as well. But unless some Senate Republicans choose truth over politics, Donald Trump will be emboldened to try to cheat his way through yet another election. So as we turn the page tomorrow into an election year and into a new decade, there is the chill of fear in the air. People are afraid for their families and their neighbors, afraid for the children locked in detention centers and the children on lockdown in our schools, afraid for women, LGBTQ people, especially trans people, whose rights will be decided by the Supreme Court next year. You bet. Afraid for our country, afraid for our planet. And the danger they feel is real. Our democracy hangs in the balance. And now it comes to us. Now it comes to us to fight back. We are a nation that fights back. Fighting back is an act of patriotism. We fought back against a king and an empire to form a new republic. We fought back against the scourge of slavery, even after it was written into the Constitution. We fought back against worldwide economic depressions. We fought back against fascist tyrants. Those moments in American history define us. And at each one of them, if our leaders had approached the moment thinking small, we would not have made it through. Americans do big things. That is who we are. And our best moments as a country have been when we see a challenge clearly and we mobilize to meet it head on. And that is why I come to you on this New Year's Eve with a heart filled with optimism. We became the world's leading industrial producer and simultaneously gave workers the right to join unions and the right to live decent lives. We created breakthroughs in science and technology and connected the world through the internet. We rocketed to the moon. We created some of the most beautiful and profound art and music the world has ever seen or read or heard. And these achievements, these victories, not one of them was born of fear. They were born of boldness and big dreams. They were rooted in our unique ability to turn despair into hope, fear into courage, improbability into triumph. They were born of our ability to imagine a better world, to imagine it so clearly and so thoroughly that we fought for it with everything we had, and we turned things we could only imagine into reality. We are gathered here today in a house of worship. For half a century leading up to the American Revolution, this place served not only for prayer, but also as a safe haven to test out our early ideas of freedom, justice, and equality. A hotbed of resistance and rebellion, a center of bold, progressive dialogue. It was here in this room, men and women gathered to confront the moral and ethical challenges of the day. They discussed, they debated, and ultimately, they launched a challenge to the oppression of British rule and started a revolution. And here, as they took their places among these pews, the spirit of the American imagination was formed, meeting by meeting, vote by vote, speech by speech. So I want to tell you about one of the people who sat in this very room, a young girl, a young enslaved girl named Phyllis Wheatley. Born in West Africa, Phyllis was kidnapped by slave traders and brought to New England in 1761. And from a young age, it was clear, Phyllis was an extraordinary person. She mastered English, Latin, Greek, and literature at a time when enslaved people could be condemned to death for learning. As she entered her teen years, she became a writer. Back in the early 1770s, as she sat in this church, in these pews, Phyllis scoured the Holy Scripture for the words she needed to give voice to her visions and to spark her imagination. She imagined a world that did not yet exist, but a world she could see. She penned ideals of a better America. Ultimately, she inspired leaders like George Washington himself. She showed through her work the power of imagination to help fuel a revolution. Week after week, Phyllis came to this room and imagined. Years before the Revolutionary War, she became the first Black woman to publish a book of poetry in America. And her imagination is woven into the tapestry of America's story. So, just for a moment, here in this place of ideas that took root and shaped a nation, here on the eve of a new year, let us come together to imagine. Imagine what our country will look like. Imagine what your own life will look like when we finally turn this page in our history. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. Imagination? Imagining alone won't be enough, and you'd be right. But imagination is powerful. It forces us to contemplate change in our lives, to begin to expect change, taking the time to see ourselves and our world better than they are today sparks urgency in our hearts and determination in our minds. So we come together to imagine a country where the decisions made in Washington aren't simply bought and paid for by lobbyists and big donors. To imagine a country where the fossil fuel industry doesn't have a death grip on our planet. To imagine a country where private prisons and detention centers don't exist and no one makes a profit from locking people up. It's for you. To imagine a country where the NRA and the gun industry don't get to put their own profits above the safety of our children. To imagine a country where big drug companies and the insurance industry don't stand between Americans and the basic health care they need. And to imagine a country where no politician has to kiss the rings of the rich in order to win elected office. We've got it. We come together to imagine this reality because this reality is now within our reach. When I am president, I say it. When I am president, we will attack corruption in Washington head on. We will attack the concentration of power that makes this government work great for the wealthy and well-connected and not so much for anyone else. On day one, we will start to make big structural change to put the people in charge of our democracy so we hear everyone's voice and count everyone's vote. On day one, we will start to make big structural change to end the rigged economy and to create a new set of rules, rules that give everyone a chance to succeed. In my administration, we will build an America where you and your neighbor can celebrate each other's success because you know that our economy is not a zero-sum game. That we each do better when everyone has a fighting chance to build real security and thrive. Exactly a year ago today, I got in the race for president. And I made a decision to run a campaign straight from the heart. As I stand here today, I am deeply grateful that so many of you have put your full hearts into this campaign as well. Thank you. Thank you. Over this past year, I've had the chance to shake hands or hug more than 100,000 people. In more than 190 now, town halls all across this country. And sure, there are a lot of differences among us. We are tall and short. We have different accents, different needs, different talents, different problems, and different dreams. But for all of our differences, we are ready to fight side by side for our common aspirations. I've met voters in big cities and small towns and rural areas who are committed to tearing down the legacy of systemic racism. I've met straight Americans who are committed to the fight for LGBTQ rights. I've met men who are committed to the fight for reproductive rights. Farmers worried about the threat of automation, and employees of startups in Silicon Valley who know that companies like Facebook and Amazon threaten our economy and threaten our democracy. It's 1 year into this campaign, and you've never found me behind closed doors with corporate executives or spending hours on the phone sucking up to donors to fund my campaign. 1 year into this campaign, and I'm still listening and learning from people all across this nation. Because those moments of deep connection are intense, and sometimes they echo heart-gripping fear. Children who don't want to get shot at school. Young people who say they'll never be able to pay off their student debt. Seniors whose Social Security checks just won't cover the basics. But fear never dominates. People tell me what's broken, but the fear always comes, lit by a hope for change. Hope for change because they believe in America and they believe in each other. And I believe too. Ayanna, my beloved sister, talks about my plans, talks about the plans we share. My plans for this country have been influenced by letters pressed into my palm by little girls. My will to fight has been strengthened by the people who have whispered their dreams into my ear. My determination to lead a movement has been forged by the tens of thousands of people who have said they are ready to fight for the country they know we can be. So, just for a minute, imagine what that country could mean for you. Imagine who you could be if America worked for everyone. Imagine how you could thrive if America was safe for everyone. If you lived in a community without fear of oppression, of violence, of anti-Semitism, of white supremacy, of police brutality, how would you live your life? If you were no longer tied to your job in order to pay off student loan debt, where would you go? Try a different job? Move back to your hometown? Start your own business? If you were no longer paying half your income in rent, what could you do? Pay off your credit cards? Put money in a savings account? Get a dog? Yeah. That idea came from Bailey when I was working on this speech. But think about it. If you were no longer stretched to make ends meet, who would you be? A coach? A volunteer? A parent? And if you could make these changes, what opportunities would it open up for you, for your children, for your grandchildren? Imagine a country where every child is treated as so valuable to all of us that their education is our top priority. I know you do. Yep. Imagine a country where teachers are deeply respected for the work they do and paid accordingly. A country where children with disabilities get the services they're entitled to and the assistance they need. Imagine a country where no child ever has to do an active shooter drill again. And imagine a country where every young adult is treated as so valuable to all of us that technical school, 2-year college, 4-year college is tuition free and ready to welcome every one of them. Imagine fleeing violence and oppression and finding an America that matches our best values every day, welcomes asylum seekers and refugees with care and compassion. And while you're imagining, please reimagine healthcare. If you are a typical American household, your family spent almost $12,000 last year on healthcare. About 1 in 5 of you, including people with insurance, didn't fill a prescription because you couldn't afford it. So now, imagine an America where Medicare for All ensures health care is a basic human right. Imagine an America where you could get your prescriptions filled without having to worry about the cost. Imagine an America where Black maternal health is a priority. Imagine an America where, if you get really sick, you can concentrate on getting well and not worry about bankruptcy. Imagine an America where monthly Social Security checks are big enough to cover the bills and leave a little extra for home repairs or an occasional meal out, or maybe even birthday presents for the grandchildren. While the survival of every living thing on this planet hangs in the balance, while fossil fuel companies still call the shots in Washington, imagine an America that has come together to beat back the climate crisis and embrace a Green New Deal. And imagine what's possible when poor communities and communities of color are no longer dumping grounds for toxic wastes and polluting industries. And just one more. Right now in America, women make up 51% of our population. You know where this is going. We account for nearly 50% of the workforce, and we earn more than 57% of college degrees. But only about 29% of elected offices in America are held by a woman. So, imagine an America where more women, women of color, LGBTQ women, women with diverse backgrounds, have more power to make the right decisions for our country. Imagine an America where the lived experience of women is reflected in committee rooms and corner offices, and yes, even that really nice oval-shaped office at 1600. Imagine an America where no matter the color of your skin, who you love, how you worship, where you were born, or what zip code you live in, you are safe and your opportunities look pretty much like everyone else's. If you can imagine all of this, if you can imagine that something better lies on the other side of the chaos and ugliness of the last 3 years, then you are more than halfway there. The first step is to see it. The next step is to fight for it. We begin this fight with a hard truth. No one who has power in Washington is going to give it up easily. Many corporate executives and career politicians and billionaires on both sides of the aisle want to keep their influence and their wealth. and they are already deep in the fight to do so. Look at the facts. Americans overwhelmingly believe that health care is a basic human right, but the private health insurance industry is dumping millions of dollars in false TV ads to scare people away from any change. And the corporate interests know just which candidates for president are on their side. A huge majority of Americans support a wealth tax, but billionaires are on TV claiming that it's impossible to get it done anyway, so we shouldn't bother trying. And the billionaires know which candidates for president are on their side. An overwhelming majority of Americans want to reduce the influence of money in politics. But wealthy donors are lined up, checkbooks in hand, buying their chance to lobby candidates privately and maybe even to get appointed ambassador. And you better believe the big donors know which candidates for president are on their side. The billionaires, the corporate executives, and their favorite presidential candidates have one clear goal: to convince you that everything you imagine is impossible, to convince you that reform is hopeless, to convince you that because no one is pure, it's pointless to try to make anything better. Those with power and those who do their bidding dump an endless avalanche of excuses, misdirections, and distractions on the American people. And it's all designed to get us to give up and resign ourselves to the way things are, with them in power and everyone else left behind. But we know in our hearts that power in America can rest with the people, and we can and must have an economy and a democracy that finally works for everyone. And we, the people, know that the America we imagine together is possible when Americans believe in ourselves and in each other, and when we have the courage to fight for it. Phyllis Wheatley was a poet, but her life was not one of gentle remove. She had circulated her poems and published in the journals of the day, and they'd begun to receive attention both here in Boston and all around the nation. And there was the problem. The boldness of her imagination frightened some people. It was a terrifying thought to some powerful white people that this young woman, this young enslaved woman, would create something so potent that she challenged the existing order. So, just a few blocks down the road, at the Old South Courthouse, a group hauled Phyllis into court. They demanded that she sit before a panel of 18 of Massachusetts' most powerful white men. They demanded that she prove that she had written those poems. In order to continue to circulate her work, she would have to prove that it was possible that an enslaved black woman could possess the intellectual capacity to write as she wrote. Their attack on Phyllis was an attack on her intellect, on her integrity, and on the very notion that she could exist. Their attack was also an attack on the humanity of people trapped in slavery, an assertion of innate non-personhood. But Phyllis stood tall. And by the end of the proceedings, the judges were persuaded, possibly even embarrassed. Phyllis left the courthouse, going on to become a nationally and internationally celebrated poet. Her poetry caused George Washington to invite her to visit on the eve of the Revolutionary War. In her short life, she became a pioneer of black literature in America. Phyllis Wheatley's spirit is the American spirit. It's the enduring spirit of imagination fortified by courage. Patriotism infused with the dreams of the great country we can be. Phyllis Wheatley challenged the power structure of the 1770s, just a few years before our fledgling nation would challenge the worldwide power structure by taking on a British king and a revolution. But Phyllis's story, and the story of generations of African Americans in this country, did not end in victory. Phyllis married badly and died penniless. And even as the hopes for the birth of a new nation continued to rise, it would be another century before the tyranny of slavery was destroyed, and yet another century before African Americans began to experience true freedom and justice in our country. And yet, in the face of hatred, injustice, and oppression, Black Americans throughout our history have never stopped imagining and fighting for a better tomorrow, not just for themselves, but for our entire nation. Black history, American history, has shown us the way to the America of our highest ideals, a roadmap of resistance and endurance in the fight to transform the heart of our nation. And that fight continues to this very day. 2020 is our fight, our chance to rewrite the rules of power in this country, our chance to come together despite our differences and mobilize a movement for change. I believe that when future generations of Americans look back on this time, this moment, they will celebrate us for choosing hope over fear, courage over timidity, dreams over cynicism. I believe that they will see that we fought to build an America of our best values, an America that works for everyone. After the lawsuit, while still an enslaved woman, Phyllis wrote a poem entitled On Imagination, and she asks her readers to embrace the power of possibility. Here are Phyllis's words. We on thy pinions can surpass the wind and leave the rolling universe behind. From star to star, the mental optics rove, measure the skies and range the realms above. There, in one view, we grasp the mighty whole, or, with new worlds, amaze the unbounded soul. In the spirit of one young woman who raised her voice from these pews more than 2 centuries ago, let us begin tomorrow committed to dream big, fight hard, and win.
All right, so this is one of the moments you've been waiting for. It's picture time. So, as you know, everybody who wants one gets one. So we're going to be lining people up over here. You can see Kevin waving his light there. Line on up and get your selfie and have your moment with our next president.